In our study of the synthesis of yoga and the yoga of integral knowledge, we have covered two complementing chapters, purification and concentration. And now Sri Aurobindo complements these two by renunciation. And the chapter itself begins, if discipline of all the members of our being by purification and concentration may be described as the right arm of the body of yoga, renunciation is its left arm. This image is very reminiscent of the Veda, where the divine is described in the form of a body similar to the human, and different parts of his being, body form, are described in terms of gradations or powers of consciousness. The human being and the human body itself, in a different text of the Upanishad, is described as inhabiting the various powers of the divine who establish themselves in the body and for whom this is the house through which the divine manifests on the material plane. The same idea we find reflected in the biblical tradition, where God made man in his own image. In the Vedic tradition, they describe similarly the body of knowledge. And the site of the body of knowledge is Jyotisha, which is loosely translated as astrology. But the word in Sanskrit, Jyotisha, comes from Jyoti, light, illumination, which reveals not only the future but the past, the present. It reveals the deeper truth. Its most crude form is what we understand as astrology, which is only an understanding, predicting future tendencies. But the body of knowledge sees, it speaks, it breathes, and so on. All the functions of the human body are as if represented in aspects and powers of knowledge itself. And here Sri Aurobindo uses a variation of this image. He describes the body of yoga. And the body of yoga has a right arm and it has a left arm. Right arm is purification and concentration. But between the two, purification and concentration, we also saw in the text earlier in the chapter on concentration, purity and concentration are two aspects, feminine and masculine, passive and active, of the same status of the being. So in the right arm there is this feminine and masculine aspect, purification and concentration. And the left arm of the body of yoga is renunciation. We see this idea reflected in other traditions. I do not call it an identity. It's a reflection. It's a similarity where in the tantric tradition there is the left hand path. And the character of it is renunciation in the most crude and extreme form, where even all activities of life, even the most ugly, are to be renounced, and there is as if an exaggerated focus on that. But we see this duality of the right and left also reflected in the way the mind works in Sri Aurobindo's writing on education, where he describes the right-hand faculties of knowledge as the synthetic, creative, intuitive, and the left hand faculties of knowledge, which are analytic. And you see a similarity again in the functions. The right hand builds positively. The left hand faculties analyze, deconstruct, break down, separate from through their analysis. I'm drawing all these allusions because you will see something common in all these descriptions, and here it is the body of yoga which is described in this way. By discipline or positive practice, we confirm in ourselves the truth of things, truth of being, truth of knowledge, truth of love, truth of works, and we replace with these the falsehoods that have overgrown and perverted our nature. And if this is the right hand of yoga, the left, by renunciation we seize upon the falsehoods, pluck up their roots, and cast them out of our way, so that they shall no longer hamper by their persistence, their resistance, or their recurrence, the happy and harmonious growth of our divine living. Renunciation is an indispensable instrument of our perfection. So we see now two very different efforts. One builds positively, affirming. The other removes all the distortions and impediments which come in the way. And the two are complementing each other. Later, he puts renunciation in its right place also. Here he says it is an indispensable instrument, but later in the chapter he will say it is merely an instrument and not an object, and it cannot be even the chief instrument, because our object is fulfillment of the divine, which is a positive aim, and negative means cannot fulfill a positive aim. So we are putting renunciation also in right context, although immediately, because that's the focus of our study, it will overwhelm us with its importance. We also keep in mind that it is only going to be an instrument. The chief instrument will still be a positive effort because the goal is positive. In this description of the right hand functions and left hand functions of the body of yoga, there are certain images and also certain aspects. So we'll look at these a little bit in detail. By discipline or positive practice, we confirm in ourselves the truth of things. So each time we make an effort, there are two sides to the effort. There's an effort to reach out to realize something, and there's an effort to remove the impediments which come in the way, also to disengage from partial realizations. Since our goal is to reach the highest, everything we attain to in between, although attained, although satisfying perhaps in itself, becomes automatically an impediment, because that self-satisfaction of a partial realization prevents us from moving forward. The analogy given in certain traditions is when you're climbing a ladder. So you reach out to the next rung, pull yourself up. Once you have crossed the rung, you cannot keep clinging to it. You cannot say, this is the rung which has saved me and brought me so far and I am so attached to it, I cannot let go. At some point when you have crossed beyond that, it actually is an impediment. You have to let go in order to hold to the next. The same idea comes in the different form when the analogy given is when you use the boat to cross the river. After you have crossed the river, you have to let go of the boat. It was only an instrument, a tool. So there is at the same time an attempt to reach to something, a positive effort and the letting go. And so the positive effort of the positive practice and the discipline, he describes as confirming in ourselves the truth of things. He is not using here the image of reaching to something, but confirming what is already there. And what is the truth of things? A series of phrases: truth of being, truth of knowledge, truth of love, truth of works, and replace with these the falsehoods that have overgrown and perverted our nature. So when you are confirming, in a sense it's already there. And yet the falsehoods have grown, overgrown, and perverted our nature, and with these positive things we will replace those falsehoods. So there is still the aspect of the negative, we are seeing it, but by focusing on the positive, the negative gets pushed out, weakens, and even is replaced by the continual growth of the positive. In the yoga, there are two strategies, and this is the first and most important strategy. The mother even recommends this strategy over the other. The other strategy is putting your attention on the negative which has to be removed. In practice, the deep truth of psychology is that wherever you put your attention, you are placing your energy and you're nourishing, and it grows. So when I look at my faults, oh, I am so lazy, I am so indisciplined, I am so depressed, I am so pessimistic, I've always been pessimistic since my childhood. How do I get free of this? I must try to free myself from my pessimism. But everywhere I look, I find the pessimism is there. I'm trying to free. And of course, what are you doing? You're only exaggerating it by focusing and intensifying that. On the other hand, if you turn attention and notice that yes, from childhood I have also had an optimism. I've had ideals, I've had dreams. They were there. The pessimism was on the front perhaps, but these were equally there. That's how I know I was pessimistic. And if I turn to those and pay attention to those ideals, to those dreams, and the vividness of them somewhere deep within me, and put all my attention on that and rejoice in that, they begin to grow until they overwhelm everything else. And very quickly I realize the pessimism, where is it? Oh yeah, it's there, it was always there, but it's superficial. Now this fills my whole being. The pessimism at best is like a thin skin or like some undercurrent. And by ignoring the negative, it fades away as long as you're constructing, intensifying the positive. So this is the approach the mother recommends when dealing with our weaknesses. Someone asked her that they had decided among themselves to do this practice, that each would convey to the other what was her weakness. So every day they would meet and they would describe, oh, I noticed you did this, you did that wrong. And mother said, don't do that, it's not very healthy because you're only exaggerating those negative tendencies. And then she discusses this, the approach of putting your attention on the positive and helping that to grow. And by ignoring, by inattention, the negatives lose vitality, they lose their nourishment, they weaken, they dry out, fade away. So here the positive practice confirms in ourselves the truth of things because it's already there. We only have to become more aware of it. In its highest, perhaps it is superconscious, so I do not directly feel it, but we feel all of its aspects and intermediate levels. And so he lists all the aspects. The truth of things includes the truth of being. And we can take it on a very superficial level. I am, I exist, I have a purpose to fulfill in life, there is a meaning to this birth. And just that, at a very superficial level, is already a positive affirmation. And then if we feel a little deeper behind, we will say, I am forever. Somewhere within me, I know I will never die. We all feel that. I don't even know where it is I feel it, but it's somewhere deep inside. But it is so vivid that I behave as if I will never die. And when somebody suddenly finds himself thrown out of the body, he's surprised. Oh, did it happen so soon? I wasn't prepared. But because we are immortal, we feel this, and this we can affirm, we can strengthen that sense of the immortality, or even go deep to find its source. The truth of being and the truth of knowledge. And it again has many facets on a very superficial level. I know things. I know I exist, if nothing else. I know so many other things, maybe even informational, maybe analytical, maybe insights. But there's something deeper, somewhere within me, not consciously, but subliminally. I know that I can know whatever I want to know. The idea that we can know our universe, we can know ourselves, has no opposite. Nowhere within us is this idea that there is a limit to what we can know. If there was, we would stop very quickly. The scientist, when he begins his exploration of the universe, is convinced that if he continues long enough, eventually he will know everything and explain everything. And this idea that we can know everything is somewhere deep within us. And these are all maybe even superficial facets of the truth of knowledge. But still, they are already pointing to deeper truths within us. Somewhere within, I already know all things because I am one with all things. Therefore, on the surface, I know that I can know everything. And just these affirmations, becoming aware of this and even deepening them, is part of that positive practice. The truth of love. And all of us know love from our earliest beginning. We begin superficially by loving our parents. And we love them so much that we are a part of them, they are a part of us. Even physically we feel it as little babies. But as we grow, the love forms, expresses itself through the heart, through the mind, through likes and dislikes. But somewhere behind it all, there is a conviction that there is such a thing as true love. And there is this sense that the true love is something so magical, so wonderful, so heavenly. And when briefly there are glimpses of it in human relationships, we rush to seize upon it. Of course, what we catch is something not quite that. We are disappointed. But still deep within is the resonance of the conviction. It exists, it can be found, it is somewhere out there. The error, of course, is to view it as out there when in fact it is within us. But the error is understandable because we are so obsessed with looking for things outside us. And deep within our heart, secretly, is that true, pure, divine love, represented in the center of our being, in the psychic flame, but also nourished from the divine love that pours upon us from all directions, from the divine herself, the divine mother. And because that love fills us, it awakens in us the truth of love, the experience of love, and the yearning to experience and to manifest it. And these are things which are eternal truths. Truth of being, truth of knowledge, truth of love, and the truth of works. Something more subtle. Sri Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita that whatever you may do, you're always doing some work. Even if you seem to do nothing, I've decided to go on a holiday, I will do nothing. You end up doing so many things, you come back from the holiday saying, I'm exhausted from the holiday. If nothing else, you have to breathe, you have to think, your heart has to beat. Something has to be always in movement, in activity, in action. Nothing can exist without being in works, in action. And the deep truth of works is that all works are His works. And because He works, therefore the universe works, the universe exists, and so on. So when we introspect even on our sense of our relationship with works, we discover that the whole universe and we are a part of a gigantic working. We may see it as a machine, but it's a living machine. In fact, something, a life which is greater than the best understanding of our life. The whole universe is as if one body, living, moving, working, of which we are a part. A very special part, but still a part. And then in our works, we find ourselves so fulfilled when we do things, when we attain to things, when we realize, when we manifest, concretize something. I've completed the project, and it gives us such great joy. I want to do something, and the idea of doing it and completing gives us such great joy. So even on very superficial levels, we can feel that works are an integral part of our self-fulfillment, of our being, of things. In the Indian tradition, they teach a verse. There are many profound things which are taught to little children, and sometimes as children we just repeat them mechanically, and when we grow up we start observing what do these words mean. And when we review them, we say, my God, this is so profound, I wish I had understood it before. So there's one prayer which we are supposed to recite before we eat food. And it goes, among other things, it says something like, this is not just to fill our stomach. When we become conscious of the act of eating, then it is an act of yajna, a sacred consecrated, an act of consecration, sacred, by which we attain to yoga, by which we attain to union with the divine. And it's something so profound, and every work can be seen in this way. This chapter, in the larger context of the synthesis of yoga, comes after the yoga of works. So all the discussions there, which we have not studied yet in detail, are included in this idea, the truth of works. So by discipline or positive practice, we confirm in ourselves the truth of things, truth of being, truth of knowledge, truth of love, truth of works, and replace with these the falsehoods that have overgrown and perverted our nature. And the suggestion here is this image of something which is overgrown, and because it is overgrown, it has distorted our nature. Falsehoods are, in this image, like weeds which have overgrown a healthy tree, a healthy truth, and somehow because of that overgrowth, they have distorted its form, covered it up, and even stunted its growth. And the image continues now with the left hand. By renunciation, we seize upon the falsehoods, pluck up their roots, and cast them out of our way, so that they shall no longer hamper by their persistence, their resistance, or their recurrence, the happy and harmonious growth of our divine living. So our divine living is this plant, not yet a tree, a plant which is growing, which must grow to be a tree and complete itself. But right now the weeds are hampering by their persistence, their resistance, or their recurrence. And all three you will find beautifully reflected in the way weeds actually hamper the growth of other healthy plants. They persist. You can take out the weeds all you want, pull them out. If even a little bit of the roots remain, they return. And those who are doing this regularly, you can take a small little patch of land, pull out all the weeds to the best of your ability, you come back a week later and they've grown again. And it's remarkable how they persist. And the only way to overcome that persistence is you go all the way down to the roots and pluck up their roots. And if you have plucked up their roots and dropped them right there, they grow again. You have to cast them out of our way, far away, clear the passage in front. So the persistence And then their resistance, even if you try to tear them, sometimes they're so hard, they don't tear easily, but also because of their tendency to cover other plants, they block out the sunlight, they resist and prevent the normal growth. If you try to walk through thickly grown weeds, you cannot move easily. So the resistance has many facets. Or their recurrence. They have a tendency to spread rapidly. They have a tendency to travel even under the ground and pop out in other places which they were not seen before, and they continue to sprout and resprout every year. All of these describe the falsehoods and the tendencies of the falsehoods within us, and so they need to be plucked up from their roots. The falsehoods that have overgrown and perverted our nature. And when that is done, there is the possibility of the happy and harmonious growth of our divine living. Now, all of this, you see, involves a concentration on the negative, on the weeds, which is not very comfortable. And yet, he says, renunciation is an indispensable instrument of our perfection. So how are we going to renounce without having this obsessive focus on the negative and on the falsehood? I had a remarkable experience, perhaps I've mentioned before, but worth mentioning again here, when I went through a kind of an introspection to discover, I realized I had been fooling myself, so I had to go back to the source of that self-deception. And it was over a period of more than a year, but it was a very intense, I would say even aggressive pursuit. And in that whole exercise, I discovered, yes, there is a layer which I am deceiving others. And that's common enough that we can be conscious of it. There are people who are not even conscious of that layer. They deceive others and are convinced that what they have been saying is true. And this is a trap which is so terrible that often there's no way out from it. But let's say we have become conscious, oh yeah, on this point I'm deceiving others, but, and then we go to the second layer where he deserves it, I have no other option, I had to do this, there was no way out from that situation, and so on. We justify it to ourselves. So the second layer comes behind that, where we deceive ourselves. Deceiving others is easier to get free from, but deceiving ourselves is a little harder. But when we finally face ourselves, especially when we bang head-on against problems created by our own self-deception, it forces us to review, I knew all along and I know that this was wrong, I did the wrong thing. And we face ourselves momentarily. But if you remember those moments, it is so uncomfortable. If somebody catches me by the scruff of the neck and says, this is wrong, this is self-deception, can you feel yourself squirming at that point? Okay. You want to get free of it as quickly as possible because it makes you so disturbed, distraught, even to face that you're deceiving yourself. But very painfully one can face it, accept it, and sometimes it creates a very strong reaction in you with a vital saying, oh yeah, but then this life is so terrible, I am so helpless, I am so incapable, this yoga is so difficult, I can't change myself. All those things come, it's wallowing in self-pity. But if somehow you can get behind that, there comes a third layer, which is the most interesting. And there we notice that we have within us all the seeds of everything that could go wrong, that we could do wrong, all the negative impulses possible that we see in other people and which in righteous indignation we criticize. Oh, you know, so-and-so is always jealous. Oh, so-and-so is always manipulating. Oh, so-and-so is... And all those things which we see out there, we discover the same seeds, exactly the same seeds within us. The difference is, in me, these seeds sprouted, in them, those seeds sprouted. And that's the difference. And where there is a similarity, we both experience the same jealousy, I understand that fellow's jealousy. And I say, you know what, yes, he's jealous, but poor fellow, let's be a little compassionate. Because I realize I have the same problem. Of course, where I'm still in the first layer, not even recognizing my own self-deception, then I may still criticize the other person, not realizing I have the same tendency. So Mother makes a very interesting observation on this. She says, whenever you find yourself getting upset over someone else's misbehavior, then it's because there's something in you which has the same tendency. This people, of course, misuse, they misunderstand. The moment you describe somebody, criticize some situation, they'll say, oh, you should not criticize, it means you have the same thing. No, that's not what she meant. She says when you have a reaction, observing somebody else, then it indicates there's something within you which is trying to cover up immediately that you have the same tendency. But when you're free of it, to whatever extent, you can look at that problem very compassionate way and say, yes, I notice there is this problem, but you don't feel judgmental about it, you don't get agitated. You in fact feel great compassion because you know it could happen to you as easily. There's an aphorism of Sri Aurobindo, I don't have the exact words, but he says something like, somebody is going to the gallows, and there's a famous statement by a European political leader or philosopher who says something like, there but for the grace of God goes, and he names himself. I could have been in that man's place, except for the grace of God which saved me. And Sri Aurobindo says, wiser would he have been if he said, there but by the grace of God goes himself, the same name. It's actually him, myself, who's going to the gallows. It's meant to awaken us to something still deeper. And it is, we are all deep within sharing the same seeds of tendencies, falsehoods in our nature. And that awakens us finally to the fourth layer, which is the most overwhelming. So when I was going through that introspection, after the third layer, when I hit the fourth layer, it was as if I had opened a septic tank. The stench, and it was the substance of human nature, which is the same everywhere. It's as if the common soil out of which we are formed, humanity is formed out of this. Well, it's the junk, it's the stuff from the inconscience, from the ignorance out of which our personalities have been molded. And so everything is there, and it's exactly the same in everybody. The difference in the third layer is which seeds have sprouted when, in whom, that's all. But the seeds are there common to all in the substance which is filth. And when that stench hit, and I saw that, and I said, my God, this yoga is impossible by me. This is the substance which has to be transformed into divinity. Impossible by me. And then suddenly it was clear the only thing which can transform it is the divine grace taking it up. Because this substance is huge, it is universal, it's enormous, of which I am a part. And to imagine that I could be able to transform this on my own, carrying the whole burden of that whole universal continuity of it, it's crazy, it's impossible. Only she can do it. And we realize at that point how important this aspect of the yoga, the conscious self-surrender and the entry of the divine force in us to mold from within and transform, how important that is for the purpose of transformation. But I'm describing these four layers because on some level intuitively we can sense the truth of all these things even if we don't have to face it head on. Hopefully we do not. But at least if we recognize this, it is extremely helpful and allows us then to face those things which need to be freed. The many falsehoods, overgrown, which have perverted our nature, which have to be plucked up from their roots and cast out of our way. so that they no longer hamper by their persistence, their resistance, or their recurrence the happy and harmonious growth of our divine living. Renunciation is an indispensable instrument of our perfection. So how we are going to do this in a way that is not obsessively focusing on these innumerable little falsehoods will be the direction of the discussion in this chapter. But first, we must understand what it is that has to be renounced. And before we can get to what has to be renounced, essentially, we need to understand the larger picture of the whole idea of renunciation, especially as it currently exists in the world and in society. And in what way the concept of renunciation is different in the integral yoga. So in the next 2 paragraphs, Sri Aurobindo takes up this discussion. The immediate next paragraph, he describes the various reasons for the extreme form of renunciation of life itself, which is celebrated and practiced in almost all traditions, or eventually is experienced by every human being at some time in their life. And then the next para after that says that for the sadhaka of the integral yoga, none of these reasons are valid to abandon the world. And one by one he takes up each of those reasons and shows how they are to be approached from the perspective of the integral yoga. And the whole thing is so beautifully structured. It starts by listing the causes of renunciation of the world from the most overarching, comprehensive, and then goes down bit by bit, layer by layer, all the way to the most petty and selfish causes. And there are 12, interestingly. So in this paragraph, which we will now take up, he starts from this, goes down all the way to the most petty and selfish, and then the next paragraph, he counters each of these from the perspective of the integral yoga and climbs through, reaching the highest and neutralizing that. And suddenly we have a very different perspective of the whole journey of life. It's so beautifully done. It has not only a certain aesthetic character, even a poetic character, but very powerfully leads us into the experience. So as we go through this exercise of understanding the causes of renunciation, and then we come down to the most petty within us, which is, I'm fed up with life, this is not good enough. And then from there we disengage from each of those and correct our perspective on each of those and grow eventually to this gigantic perspective of the whole purpose of the cosmos and correct our perspective there. And at that point, it's as if he has led us into a new vision, a new paradigm of relating to the world and our purpose in it and the yoga. So it has a very powerful experiential character, transforming character. So we will read it and study it with this intention. How far shall this renunciation go? What shall be its nature? And in what way shall it be applied? So the wording here, he uses the word shall, not will. In the casual conversation we would have said, how far will this go? How far will this, what will be its nature, and in what way will it be applied? It says shall. So the will and shall has a very important distinction. The will is something which you will attempt, which you might do, which you might fail, you might try, give up halfway, you might persist as far as you could and eventually fail. That's will. But shall, in legal parlance, is something decisive, which will firmly, inevitably, irrevocably be attained, accomplished. So shall. And in saying shall, he is affirming positively our conquest and completion of this. How far shall this renunciation go? How far, what shall be its nature? In what way shall it be applied? And now he looks at the existing mood of humanity which has to change. There is an established tradition, long favored by great religious teachings and by men of profound spiritual experience, that renunciation must not only be complete as a discipline, but definite and final as an end. And it shall fall nothing short of the renunciation of life itself and of our mundane existence. Many causes have contributed to the growth of this pure, lofty, and august tradition. And then he lists now the 12 causes. In saying this, Sri Aurobindo is acknowledging that those who have taught this are not ordinary people. They were not casual escapists from life. They were not people who had just a shallow experience of spirituality. Great religious teachings have favored this. Men of profound spiritual experience have also required this. And here we may include some of the greatest names, even of great rishis, both modern and ancient, who have chosen or have taught a path of complete renunciation of life. And it does not mean in any way that they were inferior in their spiritual development. If we could be such as them, we could be giants who can create a whole universe. Such were the great rishis who chose still the path of renunciation. In the larger picture, we must understand why before we proceed with the text. Sri Aurobindo explains this in a different context, where he discusses how, in the larger scheme of the spiritual evolution, it was necessary to experience all possibilities to their extreme, including even the possibility of the extreme possibility of discarding the world and withdrawing completely from life and realizing the absolute in its complete negation of the world. And that also is a very important spiritual experience which had to be realized in its exclusive extreme. And when all these exclusive extremes have been established and imprinted in the consciousness, and we mean here the collective evolution of humanity, then the final synthesis is possible. This is one way of looking at it. There is another way which is now looking at the way that this was done. In the Vedic realization, which was completely positive, life-affirming, there was even the idea of divinization of humanity, of the human being embodying a divine consciousness and manifesting a divine consciousness in the mind. But the idea of divinization stopped short with the body. The body was seen only as a support. It was not taken up into the transformation and divinization. Perhaps in the evolution, humanity was not yet ready for it. It was a premature idea. Whatever the reason, it stopped short there. And Sri Aurobindo refers to this as the fatal flaw of the Vedic experience, the result of which eventually was abandonment of matter. If you are divinizing and you stop short and come to this barrier, after which there is something still remaining, but which is not divinized, there has to be a clear cut in between, a separation. And so it led inevitably to this contrast between spirit and matter, which was dealt with in two different ways in two different very great spiritual giants. The Buddha saw the domain of matter and ignorance as something which had to be abandoned in favor of the absolute in order to be free of suffering. Shankara presented the same thing differently by saying the domain of matter and its ignorance is an illusion, there is only that. But in both cases, there is an abandonment, because even an illusion needs to be abandoned because it's an illusion, a delusion. And so there is this sharp turn away from life and the exaggerated, one-sided, exclusive realization of the absolute or the negation, the negative Brahman and so on, which having been fulfilled and completed, now is the time for the synthesis. And that's the work that Sri Aurobindo had to do. But before the synthesis could be fully established as the ideal, there was the huge momentum of the negative realization which has to be overcome. And there are a series of spiritual giants, Madhvacharya and others in the Bhakti tradition, who try to re-establish the relationship with the world by stating this also is divine, that this also is a domain of service to divine, and we have to realize the divine in all forms, in all things, and all that. But the power, the vividness of the negative realization is so intense that it somehow always overwhelms all these attempts. Precisely, Sri Aurobindo says, because, and the Buddha's realization is so powerful in its impact on humanity, precisely because his words and his expression came from that station of realization of the transcendent. And so it had this overwhelming character. And so there is a transition still taking place, a struggle still taking place in the world. And the last 300 years, Sri Aurobindo says, nature, as if to compel this synthesis, has forced two parts of humanity to develop in exaggeration these two opposites. The spirit neglecting matter, and the other side, matter neglecting spirit. Broadly we say east and west, but in this, nature has compelled an eventual head-on collision. And so we cannot escape it. You have to accept matter, you have to accept spirit and find some way to synthesize. And surprisingly, you will find today, and especially in the last 10 years, every tradition, including traditions which have a hoary past of renunciation going back 2000 years or more, every tradition is somehow discussing some kind of a integration of life and spirit. And those which have the greatest appeal to humanity are those which speak of spirituality in life and not of abandonment of life. We see in all the monastic traditions of the world this serious problem. Nobody wants to enter the monasteries anymore. Where barely 100 years ago, you had a steady stream of people entering monasteries. Barely 20 years ago, in one of the monastic traditions, I won't name them, I was told by their head, they used to have typically 30 to 50 applications a year, and out of which selectively they would draw a few after a very rigorous test to ensure that these were people capable of it and seriously committed. But he says now there are barely 3 or 4 applications. It's a very radical shift. And it's because the correction, the shift has been made in the mind of humanity by the work that Sri Aurobindo and the Mother did, by imprinting this new ideal in humanity. And that's how the whole momentum of the past and the destiny of humanity has as if been turned and given a new direction and push. So great religious teachings and men of profound spiritual experience have held that there are two aspects to it. Renunciation must not only be complete as a discipline, but definite and final as an end. This is one side. And the second side is, it shall fall nothing short of the renunciation of life itself and of our mundane existence. So these are two different things. First, that renunciation is not just a means, but it is an end in itself. In the integral yoga, this is one correction we will make. It is a means and not an end in itself. Then we will also discuss what is to be renounced. And this is the second side. Instead of renouncing life itself and the mundane existence, we will have to renounce ego. We will have to renounce desire. We have to renounce all those things in us which allow, promote or nourish the falsehoods. which create a screen separating us from the perception, the true perception of the divine, from the true recognition of the reality of what the world is. And it is a divine manifestation. And so those will be the things we renounce. But right now, the mood from the past is still this. It's not only a means, but an end in itself. It's not just a discipline, but an end. And so, when you enter the spiritual life, they require you to abandon the whole world, abandon all ties with the world, even change your name and cast away all past things. So when you enter the tradition of the sannyasi, you are initiated. The last step, all your clothes which you wore up to the point where you were initiated, you take them out and you burn them, and with it symbolically all your past. You are given a new name, you are newborn. After that, if someone says, when were you born, what is your name? That is a different person. You don't even think about it, you don't even speak of it, it has no relevance. You are here now and free of the world. You possess nothing, you own nothing. Of course, inevitably, the world compels it on you that you have to carry a little water bottle. Nowadays, you have to carry your mobile phone. In the old days, you had to carry a water bottle, which was the kamandalu. Different form, different shape, but still you had to carry your water and a little jhola for food. You begged for alms, but still you had to eat. Now they add a little bit of the mobile phone and sometimes the computer and other devices. So what is it that has caused, that has led to this kind of an exclusive, life-renouncing, end-in-itself renunciation practices? He says, many causes have contributed to the growth of this pure, lofty and august tradition. And we must recognize the sannyasi, when he has done it truly and not just for the sake of it, is aiming at something very pure, very high, and it is worthy of respect. We should not look down upon or poo-poo those traditions. I've found that somewhere along the way, and I can say even I was infected by that, in the culture of our ashram, there was a tendency to look down on things which belong to those traditions and even to people who have chosen that path. And it is an arrogance, it is an elitism, it is completely wrong. Those who chose that path are so sincere and committed in their spiritual life that they have done something which we would not be able to do easily. And what they're aiming at is also something so high and lofty. And all these are worthy of respect. And we just need to recognize there are different approaches and different priorities in the spiritual pursuit. So now he lists the causes, 12 as I said before, from the highest. There is first the profounder cause of the radical opposition between the sullied and imperfect nature of life in the world as it now is in the present stage of our human evolution and the nature of spiritual living. So there is this radical opposition between the two. Very carefully worded when he describes the condition of the world which causes this opposition. There are many descriptions which limit, I forget the exact word, but there are many conditions in which this opposition is described, and it's important to observe what those conditions are. He says the radical opposition between the sullied and imperfect nature of life in the world as it now is in the present stage of our human evolution. Yes, now there's an opposition. In the present stage of our human evolution, we find this sullied and imperfect nature of life in the world. So first it is sullied, it is imperfect. Life as it now is, and in the present stage of our human evolution. There could be other evolutions also. So there are many qualifiers, that's the word I was looking for. Many qualifiers which are necessary to be able to see this in opposition to the divine. So in our human evolution, and that's limiting just to us on earth at this present stage of our evolution, there can be a point in our evolution later on, and we would call it the supramental consciousness and the supramental being, where there would not be this opposition. So in our current human evolution, yes, there is an opposition. And he says, life in the world as it now is, it could be a very different form of life in the world, where perhaps we could envision an idealistic society, where everybody is loving, caring, helping each other, and we would say, oh, this is paradise. This life is worth living. But as life is now, it is full of strife, opposition, conflict, etc. So it's more obviously imperfect and sullied. But we also say the imperfection and the sullying is of the nature of life. It is somehow inherent to life itself. If you look out into nature, oh yes, the scenery is so beautiful, but this creature falls ill. That creature dies of age. That creature is killed by another. And all those things which cause suffering to our current moral viewpoint of the world. But of this he will discuss later. But it's somehow inherent in life. We could not have been otherwise. Life has to struggle and so on. So this is the first profounder cause of this is this radical opposition. And on the other side we have the nature of spiritual living, which is so different, so beatific and so on. To each of these, he provides a counter in the next paragraph. I'm not sure we will have time to read that today. So I'm wondering whether we should read the counters now to see how he neutralizes it. We'll keep it for later. Let's experience the full mood of the renunciation from the world and see where it leads us. So the next he says, and this opposition has led to the entire rejection of world existence as a lie, an insanity of the soul, a troubled and unhappy dream, or at best a flawed, specious and almost worthless good, or to its characterization as a kingdom of the world, the flesh and the devil, and therefore for the divinely led and divinely attracted soul only a place of ordeal and preparation, or at best a play of the all existence, a game of cross purposes which he tires of and abandons. Now in this single sentence, he is describing a whole series of philosophies and religious stances, and their conclusion, the common conclusion, that this world existence is to be rejected. So the first philosophy is that the world existence is a lie. This whole domain is mithya. The word in Sanskrit, mithya, is the word we use to say falsehood, lie. And so the exclamation of Adi Shankaracharya, one of the greatest giants, intellectual giants and spiritual giants, with a penetrating intelligence, he proves to you that this world is a lie. And the conclusion is Brahma Satyam. Brahman is truth. Jagat, world, is mithya. If you take this statement and look at the etymology of the words, the common understanding, God is truth, world is falsehood. This common understanding can be completely replaced by a different interpretation of exactly the same statement. And we can dwell a little bit on it. Brahman is the totality, the one who is all, transcendent, universal and individual in forms. Brahman Satyam, it is truth, self-existent. Jagat, world, but the etymology of the word is Jagat, Ja and Gat. Ja is born, coming into form. Gat, Gati, speed, movement, rapidity. So born in form by movement, coming into form by rapid movement. That's the nature of the world. What is the world formed out of? Energy in whirl, movement. Everything is whirling. The whole universe is whirling. The galaxies are whirling. The solar systems are whirling. Planets are whirling. The atoms are whirling. Everything, our life is a whirl even. Everything is whirling and everything is movement. You stop the movement and it ceases to be. It is movement which gives it reality. And the character of the movement is something moving against something else. Relativity in essence. It is the domain of the relative where all is in constant, continuous change in relation to everything else at every moment. If it was not, it could not exist. Existence itself in form is created out of a relative existence in relation to everything in totality. The total is constant. The part is in movement in relation to all parts in the totality, but the total is still is. It never grows, it never diminishes, it never ceases to be, even though all the parts are in movement in relation to each other constantly. Jagat. And what is Jagat? Jagat is mithya, falsehood. But let's look at the etymology of the word mithya. It comes from the root myth, which means relative. Mithya, formed of relativity, expressing relativity in the domain of relativity. So, Brahman is absolute self-existent truth. A world formed of movement is domain of relativity, not self-existent therefore. That's all the statement says. Now if you view that statement from this perspective, oh yeah, that's quite okay. It does not really conflict the position that the world is a manifestation of the divine. So one could see the same statement in a very different light and then reinterpret the whole tradition. To say world is not a lie, it is only a manifestation in relativities of something which is essentially an absolute truth. No problem at all. So there are layers and layers to any statement. They are true on many levels, but one can stop short at a superficial level and say, well, world existence is a lie. But therefore it must be rejected. Or he says, an insanity of the soul. That's in the Mayavad. There is again the same idea. The world is a delusion, it's an illusion, but Maya is that power which is deluding us from seeing the Brahman. But who is seeing the Brahman or who is deluded? Well, the soul. It's the soul which is in an illusion by this power called Maya, which is somehow Brahman's power, because it's the only other thing existing other than Brahman, and somehow this soul is confused by this creation of Maya, and so Maya itself is translated as illusion. Again, if we go back to the etymology, Maya comes from the root May, which is to measure out. And Sri Aurobindo argues that if Brahman is divine, his greatest power, Maya, cannot be something which is merely a power of illusion and delusion and deception. And so in the Vedic sense of the word, we find Maya means the power that measures out finiteness out of that which is infinite, measures out separateness of form out of that which is one, formless, indivisible, measures out the experience of time and space out of something which is timeless, spaceless, causeless, unconditioned, eternal. And that is the creative power of Brahman by which he manifests himself. That is the true sense of Maya. And so when we speak of insanity of the soul, yes, there is a way of looking at the world like this. Maya has deceived the soul. My soul has lost its bearings, cannot see the truth anymore. Or we can see it more profoundly as the creative power of the Brahman, which has concealed the Absolute and the Brahman for the entertainment of the soul perhaps, and for the play and certain possibilities of the soul experience. And then a troubled and unhappy dream. And so this is another variation from the Mayavad, that it is a dream that the divine dreams out, but does not have a reality in itself. There is the image of Vishnu resting asleep on the snake which is coiled, supporting him, on the ocean of milk. These are all words in Sanskrit which have symbolic meanings. The ocean of milk is the ocean of consciousness, the underlying enormous infinite consciousness out of which the world is born. And the snake, I think it is Sheshanaga, which represents which represents eternity, infinity, ananta, unending. And Vishnu resting on that is the one who dreams up the whole universe. And it exists only in his dream. And so in this way, they bypass the problem of ignorance. How can ignorance and falsehood exist when all is essentially divine? So, well, it's just a dream. Again, there's a truth to it. If you see from the perspective of the Absolute, where is the relativity taking place? In itself, there is no other than it. There are only infinite possibilities which are poured out into what? There is no other than himself. So they're poured into himself, arranged and put in a certain sequence of unfoldment in what we call space and time, but it's all taking place within him. So from a certain perspective, he is the only thing that exists. There is nothing other. And then there is this power of creation which is playing all these possibilities in his consciousness, and it is like a dream. And so in Sri Aurobindo, in Savitri, Sri Aurobindo says, it is a dream fact real, which but for the dream would not be wholly true. The world is dream of the divine, but a factual dream, because he is real, everything he dreams is also real. It is a dream fact real, which but for the dream would not be wholly true. It could not be true if it was not drawing out of his consciousness of unity, which holds the whole multiplicity together. So even this idea of the world as a troubled and unhappy dream, yes, we can understand why it is seen as a dream. But we realize also that the troubled, unhappy appearance is only an appearance and a transitional appearance. We could ask why at all it had to take the path of a troubled and unhappy passage. It could have been perfect from the beginning, and Sri Aurobindo has discussed that. It could have been equally. But this allows for greater possibilities of the play. Or at best, a flawed, spacious, and almost worthless good. So the world is at its best. Yeah, it's good, but it's flawed. It's not well designed. There are distortions, limitations in the design. Spacious, it is hollow, ultimately having no real substance or meaning, and almost worthless. Oh yeah, there are a few good things, but on the whole, it's not worth it. So that could be the best position we might take if we really want to accept the world as something, and therefore it's worth withdrawing from it all and moving on to something more worthwhile. Or to its characterization as a kingdom of the world, and this is using now the vocabulary of the Christian tradition, which differentiates kingdom of God from kingdom of world, and kingdom of the flesh and the devil. So it is the flesh. Inbuilt into the very substance of our human nature is the desire, the 7 deadly sins which bind us, compel us against our own purer soul and its will or its aspirations, and we are enmeshed in it, tempted constantly by the devil, who has free play here. Somehow God doesn't have free play. The devil can do pretty much everything, and it's more interesting to be the devil than to follow God. After all, what do you do in heaven? You sing his praises. It's kind of boring after a while. But the devil, he does mischievous things. He's creative. He challenges you, surprises you. So there are these movies, very interesting, where they have the devil who comes to tempt somebody, offers him gifts, and you must have seen, I don't remember the names, there are 2 or 3 of them. And there's always some trick he plays. You have to be always on your watch to catch so that you're not tripped over. And he gives you everything you want. You just have to ask for it. Eventually, though, the price is after that he will own you. But meanwhile, life is so interesting. Sometimes it's worth it to go through all that, even if you have to give it up at the end to the devil. And so there's this strange contradiction. Even if we call it the domain of the devil, somehow this, as a domain of the devil, it's more interesting than the other, which is kind of boring. But we can see why these ideas can have a strong hold on humanity, because they correspond to some truth of our experience. And therefore, for the divinely led and divinely attracted soul, the world is only a place of ordeal and preparation. So now, from these perspectives, and we put all these in one category now, when you look at the world, there are three possible reasons why you might want to be in the world. The first reason is ordeal, preparation, at best a play of the all existence, a game, which eventually you have to tire of. So again, this looks at various religious approaches. So in the perspective of the ordeal, the world is a place where you have to pass through your suffering. Now, depending on the religion, it could be you have to pass through the suffering so that, having been tested, you will be rewarded or punished eventually. Or there is the other perspective which says, this is a domain where once you've got entangled, it's the cycle of karma. Eventually, you suffer enough that you exhaust all your karma, then you are free, and then you can get on with the world, away from the world, and have nothing to do with it ever again. You are liberated. Till then, it's a trap which binds you. Or preparation. Now, in both cases, we can say, all right, since I am trapped, since I have to go through this, I have to get out eventually, and I will get out eventually. So let me make the most of these circumstances to be able to not only get out soon enough, but get to the best reward after. So if I suffer enough, if I do all the good things, if I follow all the laws of God which are taught to me by the priest or the church or the system of religion which I follow, then I will get a greater reward. So I prepare for life after. So the whole focus is do the things which will get you the eventual reward. Unfortunately, there's no one who has been across and then got back to tell you, oh yeah, I got the reward or I failed. Or that the rules which you were told were actually working or not, or they are going to be judged or not. There's no one who can tell you that. So it's a bit of a catch. Do you believe in it or you don't? And you're kind of at risk. So there are people who say, I don't believe in it. But when it comes time, they're on the deathbed, call the priest, just in case. I'm going to confess and erase my sins, ask for forgiveness, just in case, there's someone out there waiting to judge me. So there's this whole period of preparation, or at the best, let's take the most optimistic position, it's just a play. In certain Vaishnava traditions, this is the approach, and the understanding of the word Leela. We've referred to this word before in a different way. The play of God. So the most positive view you can give to this domain, if you recognize that it's an illusion or imperfect or whatever, the most positive view, it's a play of God. A play of the all existence, a game of cross purposes. Because if everything was actually a divine game, then why this conflict? Why this contradiction? If after all, everything and everyone is an expression of the divine, why do we at all enter in these oppositions? Why does the divine fight himself? Why does he allow himself to be trapped or suffer and all the falsehoods? So it's a game of cross purposes. It's as if parts of the game are in conflict, in disharmony with other parts, which he tires of and abandons. So eventually the game will end, and then of course we will be in our rest, tired of it. But we have seen the Leela has a very different connotation from in the original sense. It is the play in relativity of the divine playing hide and seek with himself. The divine moves into manifestation, into form, into domain of form, where form can conceal divinity. But who is it that is concealed? It is the divine himself. Concealed by what? By his own movements, phenomena, and forms. And so it's like a game of hide and seek. And for the game of hide and seek, the first step, someone covers his eyes and everyone else hides. It's a period of darkness, inconscience. I don't even know I exist. But there's a timer going on. Eventually, time and you open. At that time you're divided, spread out. It's a game of ignorance now, not inconscience. You know there's something, but you don't know what. You know things are hidden, you don't know what they are, and you don't know where they are, and you start looking for them. The joy of the game is not just in searching. It is in the anticipation. I will find something which I don't know, and I don't know where. If you go on long enough, eventually you tire because they're so well hidden, there's no joy. So the real joy is when out of all that anticipation, there is the surprise, the fulfillment. Caught you. And catching one person is the joy of the person finding and the person found. So when the game goes on long enough, people are so well hidden that they're not found. You move out of your little corner, come to a place where you will be found, so that there can be the joy of finding, and so on. So very symbolically, and I'm dwelling on this a little because of the symbolism, very symbolically, it's the divine hiding from himself to discover himself. And the mother explains this in a very profound sense. She says the origin is bliss, and the manifestation therefore is also for bliss. But what's the difference? She says in the origin there is the bliss of identity. Because of the manifestation and the separation, there can be in the return the bliss of union, which is a greater, richer, more complex, more intense bliss. The bliss of identity, I am one with myself already. And whatever the bliss, infinite, unending, is nothing compared to the bliss of separating and then reuniting, where all of myself in all its infinite layers and waves of infinities meets all of myself in all the infinite layers and waves of infinities and merges, and the layers and layers of infinities meeting layers and layers of infinities in that self-discovery. And there is no culmination. The manifestation and the reunion itself is an unending movement. And so the bliss of union is greater than the bliss of identity. And for this reason, the world was manifested. It's a deep truth. We say it in a very general way, but we can get a sense of it. So the game, the true sense of Leela is this, not just a game at cross purposes which he tires and abandons. So this is the first and profounder cause, is the radical opposition between the domain of spirit and the world, and all the facets which he has covered of different religions and philosophies. A second cause is the soul's hunger for personal salvation, for escape into some farther or farthest height of unalloyed bliss and peace, untroubled by the labor and the struggle. Or else, and a facet to this, or else it is the unwillingness to return from the ecstasy of the divine embrace into the lower field of work and service. So the two sides to this, the first is that, and you see this is different from the first cause. The first cause looked at the whole universe as a whole. There was no special focus on the individual. In the second cause now, it is entirely what we feel subjectively. And this has two facets. One is hunger for personal salvation, for escape into some farther or farthest height of unalloyed bliss and peace. Why? Because being in the world can be such a painful experience. Not always. But ultimately, when you balance everything out, it feels like such a struggle just to remain alive and to remain comfortable. If you look at the normal routine of a normal human being in the world, he is struggling all through, day and night. In order to do what? Eventually, where is he after 10 years? Pretty much in the same place. Just to stay on the same place, you have to keep running and running and running. And there is an analogy. The rat in the wheel. In the laboratories of scientists, when they want to study a rat, well, they have to put him in a cage. But you want to study this rat when he is running, when he is in activity. So if you put him in cage, you can't do it easily. And if you leave him free, then you can't run after him to measure his parameters. So what they do is they put him on a circular cage, circular wheel. And just in front of him, a piece of food. So he starts running towards the food. And as he runs, the wheel turns. And he keeps on running and running on the same spot to get to this little piece, little tidbit of food. And he goes on until he's exhausted. If you look at human life, it's a bit like that. We have our little rewards. Weekend getaway. Spend time with my girlfriend. Spend time with my family. Spend time with my kids. I'll read this book, watch this movie on the weekend, whatever it is. Some little tidbit, which is the reward for which, to get to the weekend, I have to get through the week. Starting with the terrible Monday and struggling through, getting slightly better, more hopeful, coming closer in anticipation. It's Thursday, one more day to go. And then finally, everyone rushes out of the town to get to some relaxation, some escape, some joy, some peace, silence, rest. And then you come back, start the cycle all over again. If you see this pattern, deep within, something is yearning for escape from the struggle and suffering. And escape to what? Bliss and peace. So he says, escape into some farther or farthest height of unalloyed bliss and peace, untroubled by the labor and the struggle, which we have to come back to. And we don't mind having that labor and struggle for a while, even for a long while, if we have the promise of that brief escape, bliss and peace. And for those few minutes, sometimes we're willing to struggle for days and weeks. That is so important. And so eventually something in us says, all right, but for the whole life, I need an escape for this unalloyed bliss. And a bliss, unlike the momentary happinesses and mixtures of my romantic life, which is always full of conflicts and contradictions and struggles, I want something which is there, without any compromise, without any mixture. In human life, anything which gives you pleasure carries within it the poison. Either you're exhausted, or it damages your health, or it makes you lose your sanity, whatever it is. Even the drug high makes you incapable of functioning. Whatever it is that you find you enjoy which gives you pleasure has some negative side. You cannot enjoy it long enough. Eventually you have to suffer and pay the price for it. But you want unalloyed bliss, and the bliss will remain, which will not be compromised by its opposite, and it will be also peace, untroubled by the labor and the struggle. So obviously it has to be outside life, it can't be in life. So therefore we should get out of life eventually, if that can be promised. You notice the form in which religions describe the rewards in heaven. And you see all these elements: peace, happiness, bliss, and escape from this permanently. No labor and struggle anymore. Or else, and this is the other side of it, we have had experiences of that higher life, at least in moments. It can be as a result of a concentrated effort, certain spiritual practices, or sometimes spontaneously it comes upon us. We are in nature, or just for no reason at all, we have an experience of something. From that ecstasy of the divine embrace, we are now unwilling to return into the lower field of work and service. When we come back and when it's gone, it is like a huge fall, a huge loss. That was so beautiful, there's nothing in comparison to it. And the only thing you can do after that is aim to gain that again. And if to gain that you have to be in this world, it's not worth it. Get back to this life of work and service, and it's a lower field. Instead, there is the ecstasy of the divine embrace, there is an unwillingness to return. So I am willing to abandon the whole world to get to that with an exclusive pursuit. Many who have taken to sannyas have done it because of this, either an intuitive glimpse or a very vivid experience which causes them to feel nothing else equals that. I would rather abandon the world for this exclusive pursuit. But it is in both cases, both facets of it, is the soul's hunger for a personal salvation. Behind it is implied that I get it, others do not. Nothing changes in the world. Others will not benefit by my freedom or by my peace or ecstasy. Then there's a whole other category of experiences and causes. He says, but there are other slighter causes incidental to spiritual experience. So these two are the major causes. The first was a philosophical, metaphysical perspective of the world as a whole, of the purpose of life and the nature of the world. The second is a more personal hunger for salvation, for freedom. But now there are other causes, slighter causes for abandoning the world, and all these are incidental to spiritual experience. If you have a slight spiritual experience, and inevitably everybody in the world has it in one form or other, you may call it spiritual or not, but you have it eventually in some form. There are slighter causes. And then he lists strong feeling and practical proof of the great difficulty, which we willingly exaggerate into an impossibility, of combining the life of works and action with spiritual peace and the life of realization. I will read quickly a few more. Or else the joy which the mind comes to take in the mere act and state of renunciation, as it comes indeed to take joy in anything that it has attained or to which it has inured itself, and the sense of peace and deliverance which is gained by indifference to the world and to the objects of man's desire. So these are a whole set of causes, slighter causes, they are less important. And then there is one other category, a fourth category, which will be the lowest causes, which are tiredness, exhaustion, giving up, cowardice, etc. So now we look at the third grade category of causes. All of them are tied to some experience. Strong feeling and practical proof of the great difficulty of combining life of works and action with spiritual peace and life of realization. How do you combine these two? Let's say you have some experience of peace, some glimpse of a spiritual experience or even some realization, however partial. And now you turn to the life and the work that you have to do, the action. In a normal context it will be, I have to earn my living, I have to look after my family, I have these responsibilities to my parents or to society which I have to complete. And somehow that experience and the state in which I have it and this state in which I can do the work, I am unable to connect. Either I get sucked into my life and I am running around like a headless chicken, or I withdraw, come back to myself, find myself, I am in this state of freedom, peace, bliss, whatever. And then when I re-engage with life, I lose it perforce. I am unable to continue into this, into that. And as long as I am scattered in life, I am unable to experience or even feel sometimes the reality of that. So you have a strong feeling that these cannot connect, or you have practical proof that they cannot connect with your own experience, but which we willingly exaggerate into an impossibility. And this is the distortion here. Yes, it's difficult. The practical proof of the great difficulty I have had also. But the tendency of the mind is to rush in and say, this is impossible to join. Because it's so difficult, it must be impossible. And we exaggerate willingly because to realize that the difficulty, the nature of the difficulty and struggle for it is too much. So rather we exaggerate and say it's impossible, therefore better get out of the world. You will find in many yogic traditions which are ascetic, they speak of human nature like the tail of the dog. So you can try to straighten it. It's curved, you try to straighten it. And try however much you cannot, it snaps back, curves again. The suggestion is human nature is crooked. If you try to straighten it, it snaps back. So there is a famous story of this jinn or deity hidden in a bottle. It's released and now it says, you must keep me busy in work. I will fulfill all your desires, but you must keep me busy in work, otherwise I will kill you. Why he has to make a silly rule, we are not explained, but that's the story. So in this story, the fellow says, all right, build me a palace. Poof, he has given you a palace. Give me lots of money. Poof, all the money is there. Get me great food. Poof, it's there. Okay, so the nature of the story is to tell you, all your desires being fulfilled, you still don't get it. So after you've asked for everything, you run out of things to ask after a while. And so he says, give me more work, otherwise I will kill you. So finally this fellow says, I am now the richest man, but I am unhappy because this demon is sitting on my head demanding me to do things, giving more work. That's symbolically his desire, which is never satisfied. So he goes to a wise man. Wise man says, there is one thing you can do. Give the demon this job of straightening the dog's tail. It seems so trivial. And the poor demon is busy now massaging the dog's tail. He uses oils, he uses all kinds of materials, but the tail snaps back eventually. And eventually the fellow gives up and leaves. So that's the suggestion here is human nature at the end of the day cannot be changed. But who said it cannot be changed? Where's the evidence it cannot be changed? You can say it's difficult, it's very, 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 very difficult. But there's no evidence to say it can never be changed. No evidence to say it is impossible. However more difficult you make it, there's still a limit after which it can be overcome. And we exaggerate it to say impossible. The rationale which Sri Aurobindo offers, he goes back to the very nature, the cause, the source of human nature, in universal nature, and the universal energy flows which form the habits of nature in ignorance, in inconscience, originating in their source all the way to the divine energy. And therefore, he says, all nature can be changed. Not only changed, new habits can be formed, but it can eventually be divinized because the energy itself originates in the divine. But there are conditions to divinize, to awaken the consciousness, to transform nature and so on. So it's difficult, yes, but it's doable. Not only it's doable, because there's a continuity, it is even secretly the ultimate purpose of this manifestation. Now when you look at it from that perspective, the whole universe was manifested for a purpose. And though it begins from ignorance, from inconscience, ignorance, and evolves, the goal eventually is a divinization of life. Then everything you do in that direction should be supported by everything that's happening in the universe. After all, everything in the universe eventually aims at this goal, right? So all your efforts will be aligned with this purpose. And even it's possible, and this is the position we take in the integral yoga, Sri Aurobindo discusses in one of the early chapters of this book. three outstanding features of the integral yoga. And one of those features is every circumstance of life can be made a means for the growth and for the yoga. No circumstance is ultimately found to be essentially an impediment. Whatever comes your way, you can use it to grow. Because secretly, everything in the universe is moving in that direction. When you align yourself in that direction and use the support from the universe in the right way, with the right perception and attitude, with the right tools, then everything becomes a help. For example, as an analogy, if you stand before the waves of the ocean and command them to stop and hit back, well, you get crushed. But if you turn around and say, well, the waves are leading me somewhere, and you ride the waves, then on the surfboard, they carry you very far. And it's the same with our human nature. If we recognize that all the urges within us are ultimately moving in that direction, they are ultimately, in essence, urges to realize the divine, to know the divine, to feel the divine, to serve the divine, then rather than struggling to direct them to momentary distractions, we align our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions to that one goal. And then suddenly everything begins to help us. Even so-called oppositions become supports. So in the integral yoga, this is one of the key aspects, outstanding features of the integral yoga. So the great difficulty, as it seems to be, however difficult it may be, if this is the goal eventually of evolution, then at some point as we turn to that goal, it should become also the most natural thing. I'm not saying easy, I'm saying the most natural thing. And then when done with certain methods, in particular the perception of the divine consciousness in things and the conscious consecration and surrender to the Divine Mother, it can also become, in that most natural movement, a joyous movement. However may be the nature of the difficulty, it becomes natural and a joyous journey. Always upheld by the Divine Shakti, protected, surrounded and helped by her. Everything is seen to be her movement to help us to grow and awaken rapidly. And this is what we experience as what the Mother has called the sunlit path. So, strong feeling and practical proof of the great difficulty which we willingly exaggerate into an impossibility, of combining the life of works and action with spiritual peace and the life of realization. This is one cause. Or else, the joy which the mind comes to take in the mere act and state of renunciation, and the sense of peace and deliverance which is gained by indifference to the world and to the objects of man's desire. We have wasted our life chasing after desires. We are exhausted perhaps from all those chasings, and at some point we stop. And suddenly we realize, oh, this is a much easier state. Instead of running all the time, I let go. I stop trying to be the best, the strongest, the most famous, the richest, the peak in everything. And I say, I'm happy to be where I am. And suddenly everything becomes so much simpler. And you find there's a sense of peace, there's a sense of deliverance. And once again, when you engage and involve yourself in attractions or repulsions, that is lost. So you find that indifference to the world gives you that peace and the deliverance, and indifference to objects of man's desire, and you're free. There is a deliverance. And so he says, the mind comes to take joy in the mere act and state of renunciation. Now I have stopped trying, I have stopped chasing, I have stopped demanding. I accept the world as it comes. I make the best of every opportunity that comes. And it's a kind of a renunciation, even if it's partial. but it gives the mind a great sense of joy and then peace. And Sri Aurobindo puts a parenthetical comment, and these are those slight corrections showing us what's the flaw in this whole experience. As it comes indeed to take joy in anything that it has attained or to which it has inured itself. And suddenly the perspective changes. See, this word inured tells you something very important. Inured, the word has two levels of meaning. Inured to something means that you have now become habituated to it. You found a level of comfort in it. So the slave, for example, who has to struggle the whole day in the hot sun to do hard work of breaking stones, he has inured himself to this life. Meaning, as he does his job of breaking the stones in the hot sun and struggle and the pain, he has become hardened to it, he has adjusted to it, and now suddenly if you release him from that, he will say, what do I do? Where do I go? This often happens to people who are in jail. They've been there 20 years, 30 years. They are now inured to it. They've been hardened and they're in a comfort zone of the routine. Suddenly they're released in the world. What do? I am a misfit. And they do something just to get back into jail. Because that's what makes me feel comfortable now in my current state of adjustment. There is a story, again, from the Vaishnava tradition. Narad goes to Vishnu and says, my Lord, the world is suffering so much. Why don't you open the gates of heaven and invite everybody? So Vishnu says, you know what, I've tried for a long time. Nobody wants to come. Narad says, impossible. So Vishnu says, all right, blank check, you can invite anybody. So Narad goes to the rich man and says, you're invited to heaven. And the man says, oh yeah, wonderful, I would love to go. But wait. If I go there, what happens to my riches here? Do I have to leave it behind? Oh yes, of course, because that stays on earth. Let me think about it. Do I have to leave my children? And my grandchildren is about to be born. In another 2 months, I will have the joy of seeing the face of my newborn grandchild. Give me another year, please. I want to spend time with my grandchild and enjoy my riches. Then I will come to heaven. So he goes to the next one, and each one asks something which he feels is lacking in heaven, but which he has here on earth. Eventually Narad gives up and goes to the last. He goes to the pig who's wallowing in the gutter, in the smelly waters of the gutter. And he says, oh pig, you're my last attempt. Would you like to go to heaven? Oh yes, surely. Do you have gutters there where I can wallow in the waters? And Narad says, yes, but they are perfumed. That doesn't smell nice to me. I'd rather be in these gutters. Okay, it's a story. But it conveys this idea that somewhere inside we get so adjusted to this way of being that we accept it and we don't know otherwise, and it is our state of rest. And for the mind, he says, the mind can take joy in anything that it has attained or to which it has inured itself. Inured has a second shade of meaning when you say just inured, without inured to which inured you have inured. This shade of meaning is you actually draw joy from it. It's a positive support for you. And this is what he is also pointing to, hinting at. It takes joy in anything that it has attained. You notice, when we can't do something, oh, this is boring. The moment you can do it well, oh, this is so interesting. And you take joy in anything that you have attained to or into which you have adjusted so much that now it's your normal state of being. So he says, the mere act and state of renunciation also can be like this for the mind. So we read the whole sentence. Or else the joy which the mind comes to take in the mere act and state of renunciation, as it comes indeed to take joy in anything that it has attained or to which it has inured itself. and the sense of peace and deliverance which is gained by indifference to the world and to the objects of man's desires. So the mind takes joy in this sense of peace and indifference, and that's it. So that's good enough as a reason. I don't wish to have anything to do with the world and withdraw from it. And so this is the third category of slighter causes. They are less important than the first two, which were really serious. And then the fourth is lowest causes of all are the weakness that shrinks from the struggle, the disgust and disappointment of the soul baffled by the great cosmic labor, the selfishness that cares not what becomes of those left behind us, so long as we personally can be free from the monstrous, ever-circling wheel of death and rebirth, the indifference to the cry that rises up from a laboring humanity. So these also have many interesting suggestions and hints to various traditions and various incidents and texts. But he calls this the lowest causes because they all come from a weakness and a shrinking from the struggle and a disgust and a disappointment, a selfishness even, and an indifference to the suffering of things. Now all of this is the lowest because it is the most petty and taps into the parts in us which also belongs to the lower vital. Fear, disgust, disappointment, selfishness. These are all characteristics of the very narrow little petty ego shrinking. But notice, these are precisely things which are also the most powerful compellers. Arjuna on the battlefield has his whole army behind him and the opposing army in front of him. And in the opposing army he sees his cousins in the hundreds, his uncles, his teachers, the most respected, great warriors. And suddenly he says, his knees begin to tremble. His hand now becomes weak. He can't hold up the bow. He can't stand. And he sits down. And he says, I would rather not have this. I'd rather be alone in my little village and be satisfied with what little things life gives me than kill all these people and destroy all this. And the first response Sri Krishna gives, don't be a coward. Where is your heroism? Where is your courage? And of course the story goes through many levels of awakening, eventually seeing it from the highest position. But this weakness and shrinking from the struggle, symbolically, is the struggle of life. If you see the humongous space and the huge forces which are out there, me and my little life, where's the security? What if I'm living in a world of uncertainty? So I create these little protective shells, my little home, my little bank account, the insurance that I pay, my little circle of friends, things I fall back on which give me some sense of security and protection for the future. And every parent is thinking, what about my child? I want him to have the best education, the best circumstances, the best opportunities in this huge, big, wide, bad world. But when we face head-on and we experience the opposition of the world, there can be such a shock. After all that I did in my life, the whole thing is destroyed in one fire, one earthquake, or one financial collapse. Everything is lost. My bank account, which made me a millionaire, is now in a negative. What happened suddenly? And there is a state of being baffled, shocked, unable to comprehend. This happened to many people who were working in the World Trade Center, Twin Towers in New York when the 9/11 attacks took place. Many of these were traders in the stock market. Every day they were driven from morning to evening in this drive, passion, some of them using chemicals to keep in a state of high, to keep that level of aggression, to seize, to grab, to cash, to earn in the millions. And suddenly there's this shock. A friend of mine missed, because his breakfast was late, he missed the train. By the time he reached there, the first attack had taken place already. He was saved by 15 minutes. And there were so many who reached there in time only to have the attack and barely escape with the skin of their teeth. And the shock of this whole thing crumbling down, this whole edifice of their world and their future and the things for which they lived suddenly crashed physically. It was such a shock. Quite a large number of them gave up that life. Of course, they had saved enough money. They just turned away, left the city, went to their countryside, villages, houses, to pursue the things which they were truly passionate about, which they loved to do, which they enjoyed doing. Some of them just living in nature and things like that. The life took a 180-degree turn. The shock of it woke up something. But when this kind of shock comes, especially when it opposes you and destroys everything, you realize huge cosmic labor for what? And at the end of it, what have I gained? My best friend suddenly dies overnight in an accident, or cancer hits somebody I love. Boom, everything is gone. And you start asking, what's this life about? Why am I here? Why am I doing all this? If this is how it's going to end suddenly, what's important? What's meaningful? We withdraw, we shrink. It takes a more negative form sometimes, disgust, disappointment, soul baffled by the great cosmic labor. But when we withdraw in this way, I want to do what is interesting for me, what I enjoy doing, I want to be in nature, I withdraw from the world, and what happens to things out there? They continue exactly as they are. The selfishness that cares not what becomes of those left behind us, so long as we personally can be free from the monstrous ever-circling wheel of death and rebirth. So when that withdrawal takes place, I withdraw to my cave, to my mountaintop, to my forest, to my little ascetic retreat, cloister, shut off from the world. What happens to the world? I don't care. At best, I pray for the world if I have that compassion, but I must save myself first. The indifference to the cry that rises up from a laboring humanity, to see that is not possible for us, to see the whole laboring humanity and the cry of its struggle and suffering. But the moment we rise higher into a spiritual consciousness, which is universal, we can feel, see, experience that. But it's possible for the one who so withdraws in the ascetic turn, he sees that cry and turns away indifferently to withdraw into his bliss or in his dissolution in the zero. The Buddha, it is said, as he was on the brink of final dissolution into the Absolute, he turned around and saw this huge cry of the universe in pain, in suffering. And he stopped there. And the poise where he stopped is the Amitabha Buddha, the great friendship and compassion which reaches out and embraces the world with its love. They don't use the word love because that word is reserved for human emotions, but it is metta. Distortion in Pali of the Sanskrit word Maitri. Friendship, but from the poise of the divine. What's the divine relationship with his cosmos? Embracement with love, because it is himself. As a mother embraces her child, who is herself in separateness of form and appearance. And it is this embracement with which he takes the burden of the world's suffering in his own heart to help the world to lift, to rise, and to free itself from the suffering. This is the burden the avatar takes. This is the poison that Shiva drinks, the poison that rises from the churning of the ocean of consciousness. And before the nectar of immortality, the divine consciousness emerges, there is the huge poison which engulfs the world, and the world is suffocating, and Shiva has to step in and take it himself. He does not swallow it entirely, he holds it in his throat, and so his throat becomes blue and is on fire. And there is the story, the serpent comes to cool it down. Very symbolic, each of these things. But it is the divine himself taking the burden of the suffering of the universe. But the ascetic who withdraws, even seeing this, indifferent to the cry that rises up from a laboring humanity, he turns away. And this Sri Aurobindo categorizes as the lowest of the causes for withdrawing. Although the man may have attained to some great spiritual liberation, that he can be indifferent to the cry, that is the lowest of the causes also, along with weakness, disgust, and disappointment. Now for each of these, Sri Aurobindo gives a counter. We'll just read the first two lines and pause for today. For the sadhaka of an integral yoga, none of these reasons are valid. With weakness and selfishness, however spiritual in their guise or trend, he can have no dealings. A divine strength and courage and a divine compassion and helpfulness are the very stuff of that which he would be. They are that very nature of the divine which he would take upon himself as a robe of spiritual light and beauty. The revolvings of the great wheel bring to him no sense of terror or giddiness. He rises above it in his soul, and he knows from above their divine law and their divine purpose. The difficulty of harmonizing the divine life with human living, of being in God and yet living in man, is the very difficulty that he has set here to solve and not to shun. He has learned that the joy, the peace, and the deliverance are an imperfect crown, and no real possession if they do not form a state secure in itself, inalienable to the soul, not dependent on aloofness and inaction, but firm in the storm and the race and the battle, unsullied whether by the joy of the world or by its suffering. The ecstasy of the divine embrace will not abandon him because he obeys the impulse of divine love for God in humanity, and so on. So each of these, you see, quickly he takes up one by one, 12 in sequence, and the poise of the sadhaka of the integral yoga for each of these. We'll study this in detail next Friday, and in our reading we will try to affirm these truths and turn our mind and heart and action along these lines so that we can meet the world in the way it should be for the purpose of the integral yoga. We can pause here and maybe briefly, very quickly, if there are any questions, comments, or things you want to share. The beauty of Sri Aurobindo's approach, he does not leave out anything. Everything is covered in that scope, and everything is justified from within its limited perspective, and then corrected from a larger perspective. And so all things which were included and seen from their lower viewpoint of justification are now included in a larger liberated viewpoint with a greater picture and a higher purpose. We continue next Friday. Oh.